All right, welcome back once again. I love these interviews. To me, this is the most exciting thing I get to do. I get to hear stories of how people went through their lives, how they got to where they're going. And to me, I find that incredibly interesting because the paths are never the same. The journey's never the same. We always have different things that are going on. But today we have Gino. Gino, thank you for being with us. I'm so grateful to have this conversation and start to get to know you a little bit more.
Thanks for inviting me on, Tim. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So we're going to start with what we have at the beginning of everything, and this really comes down to the question of our identity and how we start to create and craft our narrative. And we ask this question like, who is Gino? Who are you? Like, we've got a couple minutes in the elevator, or seconds, or whatever, and how would you define yourself? Like, who are you?
I guess the first thing that I would start off by saying is that I'm a father of 6 kids. So I'm a dad. I'm a father first and foremost. I am a leader of the household, a spiritual as well as, the patriarch of the family. That's the way I view my responsibility. I really have a big responsibility to teach my children financial stewardship, to teach them about God, teach them about the legacy that we're building, our values. That's a really big and hard challenge nowadays. My kids range from 26 to 11 years old. So I run the gamut. And as far as that, it's just a family man and someone who just figured out the rules of money. And I'm like, okay, I know this is a game. And now I've just been inspired over the last dozen years or so to really try to help people figure out this game of money, to have better conversations around money, to teach people that money is just a tool. So if I define myself, like I said, father of 6, educator, investor, entrepreneur. I mean, that's really how I would really define myself.
I love it. All right, so I'm immediately going to take a little bit of a rabbit trail. Apologize in advance, but people that are listening, they already kind of know this stuff, and we do this stuff all the time. So we're going to jump into it because here is the number one thing, and you brought up money. Here's the number one thing. And on my generation, my parents, it was taboo to talk about money. It was taboo to actually ask your dad, like, how much do you make? How do you do this? What do you do? It was like, no, you don't ask that question. So my curiosity is piqued already when you talk about the money aspect of it. And I'm sure we're going to kind of flow into some of the backstory and how you've gotten into this stuff. So this will tie together, but let's start with this first thing is like, why are there so many misconceptions in and around the money? And how does that tie in with the way that we were raised and what we had as far as a formulation of beliefs? Like, why is that even a thing? Like, what's going on here?
I want to zoom out because I think for me to answer this question, I need to zoom out and I need to answer by starting out with this date, August 15th, 1971. To me, that was the day of infamy. When we go back and we look at that date, I mean, it's a great feast day in my church, but Nixon took us off the gold standard. All of a sudden, the dollar was not pegged to anything. And all of a sudden, they started creating fiat currency. They started printing money. And this is where we find ourselves today. Back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, you didn't really need to know how much a person made. They just made enough. They lived a great middle class lifestyle. You could afford the 2 cars, the 1,200 square foot house, right? The 1 mortgage. Things weren't expensive. But once we were taken off that gold standard and the dollar was not backed by anything other than the faithfulness of the U.S. government, however they say it, everything changed. So people need to understand that. And when you say today it's taboo to talk about money, I think if you walk down the street, you're asking somebody and you ask them about money or their sex life, they are more apt to tell you about their sex life than they are about money. and money's become such an emotional conversation because it's so misunderstood. And I misunderstood it for so many years. And when we go back to it, it is pattern. It is relational. You start deriving these values and these feelings and these beliefs and these emotions about money from childhood. We call a financial flashpoint a mental memory. Go back, Tim, to your childhood and think about a time in your young adult life, your first memory about money. What pops up? And then if you start doing that, mine was when I was 5 years old, I went to the store with my grandmother. We couldn't afford to buy something, but she's Italian. She doesn't really speak that great English. She doesn't have credit cards. I wanted to buy these toy soldiers. She couldn't afford them. She said, Tesoro, sweetheart, when your mom comes to pick you up, we'll go back and buy them. I remember as a 5-year-old being dejected, having shame because we couldn't afford it. I couldn't understand it. I brought that memory into my early adulthood, understanding and thinking that money was scarce, that we were poor, that maybe I didn't deserve it, that maybe if I don't buy something today, it won't be there later. So it's incredible once you start peeling back the onion of the financial flashpoints or the memories that you have. And that's why money is really, really complicated. There's a relationship that we all have with money that's unique to our lived experiences. And we're working on that lived experience, that unawareness for most of the times. And we're making decisions based on money off of that 5-year-old who didn't have that understanding of what was going on.
Yep. Yeah, and we talk about that so often on this podcast about the fact of narratives and how we actually adopt a narrative whether we realized it or not. And sometimes it's through an experience like what you just said. Sometimes somebody says something to us that this is the way it is. I know for me, it was my dad said to me, like, you don't need to ever ask me about that. Don't ever ask me about money. Don't ever ask me how much I make. You don't even need to talk about that. And, and I don't know if he's going to listen to this one or not, but I'm going to share this with you anyway. We recently had a conversation where we're kind of mending some brokenness and some things that were going on. And one of the main points, he said, Tim, I have a list. And this is a list of things that I will never tell you. One of them was about money. He will never, ever tell me about any of the money and where it's at, what's going on. Like he will just not do that. And that was one of the things on this list of things. He's like, this is who I am. This is what's going to happen. And I'm now in my 50s, so I'm pretty much like, okay, I'm going to accept my dad and love him who he is, what it is. I'm not going to change anything, right? But that is a belief that I had growing up into my life. And that's exactly what you're talking about. You use the word flashpoint, but I know that there are the experiences and I know that there's these things and we create and form these beliefs that create our false narrative about money, life, business, all of these pieces. So I think we're going to continue to pursue this thing. We might actually just turn this entire thing about, because that's the expertise that you have.
Yes, but I don't even have the expertise. I've just learned this over the years. I'm going through to a financial therapy, quote unquote, class. I'm getting a certification in financial therapy because I think it's so important. But what's important is it's okay that your dad said that's the way he is. He chose to be that way. But you have to understand, as a parent, if you avoid talking about money, what happens to your children? They adopt that pattern or that belief, and they're going to do that to their kids. Do you want your kids to grow up as an adult, not being able to open up their credit card statement because they want to avoid it, or not being able to understand what a mortgage is or a car payment? You're doing that unknowingly. Now you know it because now you've heard of it. So I want people to take the responsibility to say, how do I approach this subject? Because no one ever taught you how to talk about money with your kids. Right. I think as a parent, being transparent and being open and being honest with your children, and not by saying, this is who I am. Well, you know what? This is who you are today. 10 years from now, you're a different person. 100%. You can choose to be a different person. And that's what I hate when people say that, because I was like that. I was the pizza guy hiding in the kitchen. This is who I am. I'm the pizza guy. Until I realized, no, I don't need to be that way. I can start changing how I believe and how I think. And once you grasp that and you take responsibility over that, you stop becoming the victim and you start taking control, and there's hope. You can start creating the life that you want.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of, again, everything comes back to this. How are we changing and crafting the narrative that we want for in our lives? A lot of times, and we've talked about this so many different ways, we adopt those narratives in our lives. And so now it's a choice, like what you just said, is it's a choice in our own lives. Are we going to continue to live? Now, I mean, before it was in ignorance, and now it's a willful choice. So if we're going to continue to live in our ignorance, or are we going to choose to make that decision to change the narrative, to change the direction that we're going? So I love that. I love where we're going. So here we are. You have that same, you had a similar situation, not exactly the same, but we're pretty close. Whatever it was the false belief about money. It was a false belief about what we do as far as in the business. And you mentioned yourself that, hey, I'm an entrepreneur. I wasn't allowed to be an entrepreneur because they were just like, what the heck is that? Get a job, go there, do this thing. That was the societal pressure as well as what the narrative was supposed to be for me. What was your core belief before you stepped into business, or what was that false narrative that you could identify and say, hey, this was the thing that was really kind of putting me off track? Maybe it didn't mess you up, but it was definitely putting me off track.
I was fortunate that I was raised in a family that we did have a business. My dad opened up his restaurant when I was 8 years old. So I went to work with my dad, and I loved it. And I fell in love with quote unquote business. I didn't understand what business was. I thought you open a business to provide for your family. That's how it was in the 70s and 80s. You just open up a business. But now the false premise is you open up a business to provide value for the marketplace. And that's the reality. Well, I'm a landlord. So if I'm buying a building, I better provide a nice, safe, clean, affordable apartment, or else I'm going to be out of business. And for me, I bought my restaurant with my family when I was 24 years old, May 19th, 1994. That's when I bought the restaurant. I just got out of college a couple of years, and I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I loved being in business for myself. I was never an employee. I liked being the employer, but I had so many false beliefs around money. My parents always told me, stay small, don't take too many risks. They always told me to save for a rainy day, never for a sunny day. They always told me to limit my risks. And we were stuck with one location for over 20 years. And for me, when I started buying real estate with my business partner, Jake, we took us 18 months to find the first deal. But within 5 years, we had over 1,000 apartment units. I mean, what changed? To me, it was all about those beliefs of saving, of scarcity, of fear, of shame around money, and not understanding that money is just a tool there. The better you become at something, ultimately, the more money you end up making.
Right. Yeah, my computer's acting kind of funny. We're going to just take a second on this part of it. Something's acting in that. All right. You can still hear me? We're good?
I can hear you,
All right. Yeah. So, all right. Starting back in and looking at what this is, the amazing piece of this is the break. How do we, or what did you do to look at, like you said, you just kind of had this idea, this concept, stay small, save for a rainy day, so on and so on, and then build in on that. What changed? What created that adjustment in that narrative that you had between small to like, okay, now we've got 1,000 units. I mean, like that's a big difference. That's a big change.
There were 3 events, and if I could just share those 3 events real quick with you, because I think it's important for people to understand if you need to change or you want to change, you have to be willing to change. And you have to be either going through some pain or some discomfort, and or you have to be living a great life. The vast majority of the people, 80% of the people, are just sitting in the middle, and they're just mildly uncomfortable.
Right.
In 2007, my dad passed away, and I had been with him at the restaurant for a long time. And I just said to myself, am I living his dream or am I living my dream? And I had to be honest with myself. I think I was living his dream. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, I don't really want to be here at the restaurant anymore. I want to do something different. 6 months later, the Great Recession hits. And it was just further justification that God's telling me, I think you need to do something different because this gig ain't going to work out for you in the long run. And I just was working harder. I was making less. I was stuck somewhere that I didn't want to be. And the third revelation for me was when I picked up a book by T. Harv Eker called The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. I read the book and he said, your fruits are in your roots. Well, my fruits sucked because I had no roots. I had very, very little value to give people. And those 3 events pretty closely, tightly connected within a 6-month time span completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I said, I need to take responsibility. And that's when my personal development journey started. Probably end of 08, beginning of 09.
So this is a really important question because I think this is one of the misconceptions that people have. So you said that your personal journey started in 08, 09. And I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you arrived? Have you felt like you've grown to the point where you're good?
It's just different. I mean, as far as financially, I am making more money than I could ever possibly imagine. I'm working a lot less and I'm making more than I could have ever dreamed of. That's what ends up happening. You work hard for years and years and years. Then you get to a point where, wow, okay, you don't have to do as much work, but you're making more money. It's really never, the journey is never about the money. The journey to me is more about that feeling of success, that feeling of fulfillment. And ultimately, if you really rip it down, when you ask somebody 10, 12, 15 questions, what you're going to hear from the vast majority of people is they just want to help others.
Yeah.
That's where people want to get to.
Yep.
And one way of getting to that is by taking care of your needs, not having to do the 9 to 5 or not having to pay the bills, where your bills are taken care of, where you can start something on the side, or you can do something and you can actually put effort and time into it and not worry about monetizing it and just saying, I want to go out and help people.
Yeah.
I want to start a podcast, or I want to write a book, or I want to do some coaching or consulting, or I want to do a workshop just because I want to give back.
Yeah.
And then you'll see the vast majority of people, they light up and they're like, this is really what I ultimately want to do.
Yeah.
Have I gotten there? I mean, certain elements, certain times, but
Right.
I'm still growing, and I still
Right.
want to. And now I've incorporated, Tim, the fact that I want to teach my kids about business. So I'm starting this Barbaro 360 company with them to teach them how to build a business and to teach them the skills they need to prosper and to continue our legacy.
Yeah, that's exactly what everybody says is in this journey, you started 08, 09. In this journey, it's never a point where you feel like you've completely arrived. It just never happens. And then the other thing is, and this is what, like you said, you're in a position now where you wouldn't have been able to dream. You wouldn't have been able to think that this was even something that was possible. So let's take this back. Let's rewind the clock. Let's go back into 08, 09 and say, okay, what were the heartaches? What were the challenges? When was the point that you were like, hey, dude, I'm ready to give up? But you persevered, you went through it. What was that part like? Because there's a lot of people that are in that exact moment that are literally ready to give up, throw up their hands, walk away because, man, this is tough.
The first thing that you need to do if you're listening to this is you need to ask yourself and be honest with yourself. What is it that you want to do? For me, I always ask the question, when that question was asked to me, I would always say, well, I don't want to be here. And that's the wrong answer. It's because that you're not getting clarity. Once I got the clarity, and as you're thinking about this, it may be hard because right now your body's going through a lot of cortisol. You're just revved up right now. Your emotions are so high, you can't think clearly. You really need to take a space. You need to really sit down and just be calm for a little while and really think deeply. What is it that I want to do? Like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? What do I see myself doing? And for me, when I rewound the clock and you go back to that, it's like, yes, I still want to own a business. I still want to have a business where I can make money. I still want to have a business where I can grow. I still want to have a business where my lifestyle can be anywhere. Like right now, I'm living in Florida, but my properties are in Tennessee. I'm not tied to anywhere. Once I started mapping that out and saying, okay, this is where I want to go, I could create a plan. Yeah. And that's when I met my business partner, Jake. I'm like, wow, thanks, God. He came into my life at the right time. And then all of a sudden, we started looking for deals. It didn't happen overnight, but I was clear. Multifamily, not in New York. Jake's moving to Tennessee, and I'm down. We're down in Tennessee.
That one little note, not in New York, and anywhere but New York.
And I think that's what we need to do. I think that's the first step because we don't lack the motivation. We lack clarity. And if we're not clear about something, you have that fear. You have all of a sudden, it's the same with money or anything you're thinking about. If you're not clear about what you want to accomplish, and this is for you, Tim, and your answer is different than somebody else's answer. That's why you really need to think about what you are. And then ultimately, the last piece to this that I would say is you really need to align it with your values. Because if you don't align your decisions with your values, because when I was at the restaurant, not only was the financial, obviously not there, but it didn't align with my values because I was working on the weekends. I was working on the holidays. I was working harder, making less. I'm like, I'm supposed to be this family person who's supposed to have some time with their family, and I have less and less time. It was going in complete misalignment with what my values were at the time. And that's why I didn't feel good. And that's why it didn't feel good to me.
Mm-hmm. So this brings up a really, really great point. And I love that you brought up values because that's a really key element. That's your foundation. That starts everything. But the other thing that you mentioned is clarity and bringing about clarity. Here is the gap that most people struggle with from all of the conversations is how do we get from the value to the clarity? How do we find that clear? Some people use the word purpose. Some people use the word vision. Some people, like you're saying clarity, and I want to kind of be a little bit broader and inclusive and bring in those words of purpose and all the other things that people kind of talk about. So how do we get from a foundational aspect of this is my core value, this is what I'm going to live and die by, these are my hills I'm going to die on, whatever you want to call it. How do we get to that clear goal, clear vision, clear purpose? How do we get that clarity that you're talking about?
To me, there's two ways you can do it. I think the first way is you can go out and literally hire either a life coach and or a business coach, but more of a behavioral type coach, I think. The second way, if you're on this right now, I did this many times using Stephen Covey's example of start with the end in mind. I
Yeah.
mean, start with yourself 20 or 30 year, 40 years from now on a rocking chair. He uses a funeral. Let's not be as morbid, but let's just sit on the rocking chair and you're kicking it back. How do you want your life to look like? How do you want it to be towards the end of your life?
Yep.
For me, I always wanted a big family. Once me and my wife got married, I've got 6 children. I want to have a bunch of grandchildren. I actually want my kids to love me, and I actually want to have a great relationship with my kids. I literally want to have the legacy that I've built be passed on to them. So for me, what does that look like today? We need to reverse engineer all those thoughts and all those feelings and all that clarity 30 years into today. And that's what I've been working on the last 7 or 10 years. I couldn't be working at the restaurant every weekend and on the holidays and have a relationship with my children.
Yep.
I needed to have at least one meal a day eaten with the entire family. We typically have breakfast and dinner, but at least one a day. We need to have some type of rhythms in our family. Monthly meetings, quarterly meetings, whatever that looks like. I need to teach my kids about money. They need to be involved in the financial decisions around money. So we have an open book in our family now. It wasn't like that years ago, but
Right.
thinking about what it looks like down the road, that's what you need to do if you're listening to this. You need to be really clear on what that looks like for you. And like I said, that picture is different for everybody, but I will guarantee you the vast majority of Americans haven't done that because with the advent of AI and the advent, it's so easy to take the shortcut and not even to think 3 or 5 years out, let alone 30 years out. But if you don't know where you want to go, how do you know to plan that journey? What's the first step you're going to take? You don't even know where to start if you don't know where you want to end up.
Right. Well, and I would even add too, I agree that point from Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Individuals. That's the name of the book that you're pulling that from, I believe.
Yep.
And then but there's other, you talked about one, there's 6 more. There's 6 more habits that actually kind of all work together.
Yes.
And if you're listening and you haven't read it, you got to go back and you got to read that, because not just the fact of starting with the end in mind, which is absolutely key. There's other pieces of that allow you to be able to act on that. So I love that you brought up Covey's book. I think that's absolutely key. Second thing though that you brought up, which I find is really interesting, is you started putting systems in place. So you've got your values, right? You created the values and say, this is what I want it to look like. You have the end in mind, but now you've got this middle piece. And this is where I think the clarity and everybody messes up is you have a system or a process that you're like, hey, I'm going to do at least 1 meal a day with the family. That's just, it's not necessarily a value. Yes, it's attached to a value, but that's a process. That's a system that you put in place to be able to say values here, system process is going to give me my end goal. Would you say that's accurate?
100%. And when you had asked, Gino, how did you go from one restaurant to over 1,000 apartment units? It comes down to systems, processes, but also the core values and the mission. If you don't have core values that are leading your family, because running a family is the same, I want to say it's practically the same as running a business. You need to have culture. You need to have boundaries. You need to have rules. You need to have rhythms. You need to have systems in the family to be able to run the family, especially when you have 6 kids and they're all different ages, right? And I've got 6 cars in the driveway right now. So can you imagine every time someone needs an oil change or someone needs, if I don't have a system to be able to show all the kids, this is the page where everyone's car is on, document how many miles you have, document how much you spent on the last, oil change or whatever. When's the next service coming up? You need to have this with your children, because if you don't have systems running the family or running the business, you're going to be stuck hiding in the back of the kitchen, washing dishes. And once again, it's not good or it's not bad. It's just something that I didn't know. I had no idea. And when I started buying real estate, the big aha for me was, wow, real estate's not just real estate. It's actually running a business. And if you want to own more than 100 units, you better know how to scale a business. Because if you have 100 different properties, you're running around cutting the grass and paying all the bills, it's not going to work. You have to treat it as a scalable business.
Right. All right. So let's do this, because I reading some of your background and then just getting to know you, I think this is absolutely key. We have values, key element, foundational. We have system to be able to get you to the end and goal, or the end, whatever the picture that you have as far as the vision. The one thing that I feel is most neglected in a lot of these types of conversation is the personal development side. Your character, how you become the individual that's worthy of the legacy. And you talked about that earlier in the show. becoming that individual that's worthy of a legacy, becoming an individual that's worthy of having your kids still like you, still want to be around you, still, what are the things that you have to do? And how does that personal development tie in with what we just discussed as far as values and the systems and then the end in mind?
It's interesting. I'm writing down notes as you say this. And one of the things that I've learned, actually, I learned that on a podcast about a month ago. And it's something that as leaders, we need to do as far as fathers, as far as leaders of entities. You need to connect before you correct, right? You need to connect before you solve. And if you can do that as a father, as a leader, that will revolutionize your life. Instead of telling your children what to do, connect with them. You need to be able to listen. And that's something that I learned. And it seems so obvious, yet 90% of the population does not understand what listening is. It's not waiting for your turn to talk. It's literally sitting here with Tim and just really hearing the words, watching his body language, connecting with Tim, building rapport, and then finding out what's going on. Not telling Tim, this is what you should do, because Tim knows what he needs to do. It's inside him. But sometimes Tim is running around. He comes late to meetings sometimes, right? And he's all,
Side note, I was late to this meeting. You coming in.
And he's all,
leave that one in there and wrap me out. I appreciate you.
And he's all flustered. And you don't know what's going on. I want to connect with Tim. I'm not here to tell Tim what to do. Tim knows the answer to all of his questions, but we don't have that space. And that, to me, what a leader ultimately ends up doing. Is it easy? It is one of the most challenging things you can do as a parent, to be able to listen to your child, be able to give them the space, to have them be screaming at you, but you're at the same time, you're only a teenager. Your frontal cortex is not developed. You're acting that way because that's very hard as an adult. And you go back to the Covey book. Stimulus response. One of the biggest things you see that's lacking in society right now. And if you can understand that you can emotionally regulate your emotions, I'm going through this now as an adult. I have sympathy and empathy for kids who are younger, who have never been taught this. It's something I think is foundational. If you want to be able to grow an organization and to be a leader nowadays, it's funny, Tim, Jake is really challenged sometimes. We have 90 employees on the property management. He has these amazing ideas. Just a quick example. We were changing these decks out, and Jake is like, we got to put these 6-inch posts. And the whole team is telling him, no, it's too much money. It doesn't look good. Well, he knew in his heart of hearts that that's what he needed. That's what he wanted. And sometimes as a leader, you want to take out information and then but at the same time, that's what he wanted. 2 months later, the team comes back and goes, what a great idea. They look amazing. Because he sent me a picture. I'm like, bro, these things look great. Was this? He goes, yeah, this was my idea. But I had to fight tooth and nail to get that. So as a leader, sometimes you have to play both sides. You have to be willing to stand up and say, I know what's best for the organization. But at the same time, you need to listen to the organization. And you sort of need to make them understand at times that it's in their best interest. I'm doing this because I know how it looks. I know the long term, it's going to be here 5 more years. It's going to look better. It's going to be easier to install, whatever it is. And that's the challenge that sometimes we have as leaders. We have all these ideas, all these great ideas, but we need to convey that to our employees or to our team members to say, hey, this is why we're doing this. And you sort of have to give them the reason why it's good for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you look at that from a leadership standpoint, you can't get anything done without people. But yes, but yes, sometimes you got this idea and this vision, and everybody's fighting against it. But you still can't get it done without people, right? So I mean, like if you're bullheaded and you just run into it like a China shop, I mean, you're going to be like,
you can win. You'll win short term, but long term, you'll burn people out, and then you have a culture where it's an issue. We love in our company or in our organization, Jake says, if you have a problem, there's a problem going on, I want you to bring 3 solutions. Hey, leasing is down. Okay, great. That's the problem. Give me some solutions. Oh, we can do more Zillow marketing. We can offer specials. We can make our monthly move-in rate from 700 to 400, whatever it is. I don't only want the problem. I want the solution. And if you're a bull in a China shop, you're not going to get solutions. You're not going to have people speak out. People just want to be heard. And that's the great thing. You can have people be heard, but at the same time, tell them, well, this is why we're doing it this way, but you need to have people heard. That's the thing that I think most leaders make mistakes on.
All right. So let's go back to this whole aspect of becoming that person, right? That's personal development. That's emotional intelligence. What you're discussing right now is the ability to be able to regulate your emotions, to figure out, okay, I know that this is the right way, but how do we then communicate that to be able to get it in a position where people are willing to accept it? That's influence. That's obviously at the core. That's what leadership is. What are the things that you do in order to increase that emotional intelligence in your own life? Pass that along to your kids. And all of this is summed up in personal development. So what are the things that you're doing to increase that skill set in your own life?
Those who shall be humbled will be exalted, and those who are exalted shall be humbled. I think as you get older, you start to realize you really know very little. There's really very little that I know. And I think the problem is when we're younger, and even those of us who may be older, there's a lot of ego and pride involved. And pride is really one of those deadly sins that it really corrupts a lot. And if you always have to be right, you always have to show that you're superior, at a certain time, people don't want to work with you.
Yeah.
And then you will have, as Ray Dalio says, you will have blind spots. You ultimately will. There's cognitive biases that come into play. I just try to keep an open mind. I know that there's a lot that I don't know, and I try to listen to differing viewpoints. I had a guy on a podcast today that's a multifamily broker in New York City. Everything's going to hell up there. I'm trying to understand why he would want to stay there. And then I just realized that's where he grew up. That's where he wants to make his mark. He doesn't want to leave there. That's what feels comfortable. But to me, my rational bias is like, bro, you're so talented. You can make money elsewhere. But that's not for him. So for me, understanding my cognitive biases, understanding that I don't want to be part of the Dunning-Kruger effect where I know very little, but I'm the loudest. I need to be aware of that as well.
Yeah.
And I just want to become someone who is not an expert. I hate that word expert because today there is so much that we don't know. And if you can stay humble and try to be that growth mindset, try to continue to learn and understand that, hey, you know what? There's things that we don't know, but how can we learn that? How can we better ourselves and improve ourselves? That's to me what makes a really healthy leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right, we're kind of winding down, but I want to give you a chance because we've taken a different trek on this path. We talked about your business. We talked about some of the false beliefs and the false narratives that have been adjusted and changed. And we've left some really what I feel like is some great points of, okay, this is how you adjust. This is how you learn. This is how you grow. Is there something that I'm missing that you're like, hey, man, I was really hoping we could talk about this topic?
I think you've hit everything. The only thing that I would add is if you're out there and you feel that there's pressure around money, there may be a little fear around money, there'd be a little shame around money, a little uncertainty, a little anxiety around money. Just understand that that's the vast majority of us. Even if you do have money, you know, I mean, I think that's where it comes, because then all of a sudden some people may make money, but then all of a sudden they may have that anxiety of, hey, I'm going to get sued and I may lose my money. So don't think that you're the only one that has these feelings. And for me, I would just end with this, is if you are married, most problems revolve, quote unquote, around money, but money is not the root cause. Money is just something that's behavioral, symptomatic of that root cause.
Right.
And what you need to do as a couple is you need to be honest with your money bios, with your history around money, how you were raised around money, what your beliefs are, and you will be blown away by the fact that your wife or your husband was raised differently than you, had different beliefs, and that's why she likes to spend, and that's why you like to save. And having those aha moments, those awarenesses where you can sort of come together and say, let's spend, but at the same time, we really do need to save a little bit. Have those honest conversations and understanding where your trigger points or where your emotions or your financial flashpoints were created, and share that, because ultimately what you want to create with your spouse is financial intimacy. You want to be able to be intimate with your spouse and be able to talk about money with your spouse in a way that won't anger them, but they'll hopefully will have some empathy and some sympathy for the way that you were raised around money.
All right, give me a quick example, because I know a lot of people, we talk about this, finances, and you're saying about the root. Give me a quick example of something or situation between a husband and a wife that has a cognitive bias or an assumptive bias. Give me an example of something that is real life, so that way we can kind of really understand what that is.
Excellent. My wife, single family household, youngest daughter, never had money, working paycheck to paycheck. Rich people are evil. I am a son of two immigrants, save. I've got goals, went to college. I'm building a business. We get married, we get together. She leaves her tribe. All of a sudden, she's starting to feel guilty that we're making money and they're not. And I think rich people are evil. Gino, if we become rich, are we going to become evil and we start clashing? But I am of the mindset that I need to save because scarcity, save for a rainy day. I'm an immigrant. So Joel, we can't spend money. We have to save money. But Gino, we've been making money. So there were the arguments where I was conditioned to save money and I was afraid of money. And she had no really understanding of what money was or what money could do for you. And you had those conflicts. Why are we spending $4 for an organic muffin at Whole Foods? Why are we doing that? Well, we have the money. Yeah, but I need that money to save for college. I've got 6 kids I got to put through college. And that's where the arguments start. It's not about the money. It's about the emotions and the feelings and the patterns and the behaviors that we created and we have before we brought it to this relationship. And if you can start opening up, and we did, and we have, and now all of a sudden I was the tyrant, she was the innocent, right? I was, making all these decisions, and she's like, okay, I throw my hands up. That's not a way to have, there's no intimacy there. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of emotions. And then all of a sudden she feels as if it's not even her money anymore. And damn, it's like, we're married. Whatever's mine is yours. That's what's going through my mind. But she doesn't feel that way. And you see what can happen left unattended to over the years. That can open up some severe wounds. And it really comes from a way of not being able to communicate with your partner, with your spouse, not being able to understand how to open up those communications.
Yeah. And then we pass that on to our next generation, and the next generation fights about it. And like, it's just an ongoing thing. So I'm really glad you used that as an example, because that's just absolutely perfect. And I've seen it happen over and over again. And then everybody blames finances, and it's not really that. It's just good stuff. Good stuff. All right. How can people get in contact with you? I know you've got several companies going on, but how can people get in contact, learn a little bit more about what you do, how you do it? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
So Tim, if anybody listening to this, if this resonates with you, just go to barbaro360.com, BARBARO 360.com. If you want to schedule a call with one of our team members, love for you to do that. If not, just check out the podcast we have. We have the Julie and Gino podcast. We have the Happy Money podcast. And I've got a podcast with my business partner called the Jake and Gino Show. It's a real estate show. So if you're interested in any of that, money, family, finance, just go check us out at Barbaro 360.
Love it. Love it. All right. Thanks again, man. And I truly appreciate it. And here's the other thing too. And we kind of touched on a topic with money that tends to not be talked about very often. And I'm really glad we did, because it's something that is absolutely key. I mean, shoot, I've seen people with 6 figures sitting in the bank and still stressing about everyday type of stuff when it comes to money. So I'm really glad we had a chance to dive into this. The other thing I would add to this, and I echo what Gino is just saying here, is the fact that if something's touched you, if you resonate with something, reach out to us, let us know, because we want to understand where you're at. The active listening that Gino talked about earlier, that's what we want to do here. We want to know where you're at, because the main thing that if I can communicate anything else, I want to make sure that you guys know, as you're listening, you're not the only one going through it. You're not alone. So in light of that, make sure you keep writing, keep crafting, keep building your narrative, because you're the only one who can do it, and your story is worth it.